listening to the podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood. And on this episode, I am going to be reviewing the recent Podcast Movement event. Podcast Movement took place in Denver a couple of weeks ago, and it really was a terrific event. What I have seen at Podcast Movement is that really everybody is there. And I would say that if you're not attending Podcast Movement and you're in this space, I would highly recommend that you go check it out. Whether you're a content creator, whether you are a software company, all of the hosting companies are there. Many of the advertising agencies and brands attend the event. And I would say that we are just seeing an increase in people who are attending these shows. It is really a terrific time to have conversations with other industry individuals. So highly recommend that you attend the event. We do have another Podcast Movement Evolutions coming up in March in LA. And then next August, Podcast Movement, kind of the standard Podcast Movement, will be taking place in DC. So the event really is great, whether you go to Evolutions, whether you go to the standard event. I feel like Evolutions feels a bit more industry focused, but I feel like it's so interesting because I talk to others who say they feel like it's more creator focused. It does feel like maybe more corporations come to that event as opposed to indie companies or indie producers and content creators. So that's kind of my take on the landscape of Podcast Movement, but I would highly recommend that you attend the event if you have not. Now on to my recap of the event. It was terrific, as it is always. I was really fortunate to be able to bring along several of my team members to the event. And our main goal at Podcast Movement is to meet with as many of our agency partners, our podcast partners that we represent, as well as different software companies that are making real advancements in the space. So that is my main objective at the event. I don't go to nearly as many panels as I would like to, and I always put it on my list to go back and listen through some of them, and I definitely will be doing that this year because I did not get to many panels at all. I will also say, unfortunately, in Denver, all of the panels were, except for the keynotes, were inside the expo center, and it was really loud and hard to hear. So hopefully that isn't something that they will do again. But I know that the sessions do hold a lot of information, and they're really great to check out. So let's talk a little bit about what I gained in having some conversations with our different industry partners. First of all, I would say, as I have been talking about for a while on this show, programmatic is definitely coming to a place where we are seeing more of it in different kind of renditions of programmatic. And when I say that, what I mean is you can buy traditional programmatic ads. Of course, you can buy through Spotify's audience network. You can buy through VastTag integration. So there really are some different ways to go about getting your programmatic ad buying in. But I would say that it's a topic that we're talking about more now than we have ever. And I think that it has a lot to do with this desire really to maximize the exposure that advertisers and brands can have within the space, and also really maximize the amount of revenue that can be created. Because ultimately, we know that podcast advertising is really producing a fraction of the dollars that it should be producing when you compare it to other forms of advertising and other mediums. So we definitely want to make sure that we're capitalizing on the industry and we're really getting those dollars and we're giving the exposure to the advertiser that they need. One of the things that I heard mentioned several times that I thought was really interesting is that podcast advertising feels very similar to CTV. If you're not familiar with CTV, that's essentially connected TV. And when you think about connected TV, think about platforms like Hulu or what was HBO Max and is now Max, those different types of platforms where you're able to essentially access TV on demand, and then you're being served ads through that process. I think the comparison is really a very fair comparison to make, because essentially when buyers are going out to buy CTV, They're looking at things like audience segmentation. They're looking at data-driven insights that can be provided. They're looking at brand safety and really viewability. So those are things that are important to CTV. And they're also things that are really important to podcast advertising, especially as we move more into that programmatic kind of space and environment. And I think what is neat to me is as I hear this comparison between CTV and podcast advertising, is it's really great to know that advertisers are thinking about approaching it in this way, right? That we can have segmentation, which is something that we definitely can do with programmatic advertising, that we can really create brand safety, that we can give you the data that you're interested in seeing. Those pieces to me are really important for us to think about. The industry as a whole is nudging its way in the right direction. I still really believe the technology that we need to perfect that isn't here. A lot of the technology that we have been using feels clunky, in my opinion. And so really, I think that we need to work as an industry, which we are working on, continuing to develop our ad tech piece. So I really believe that that's an important element to really getting us to where we need to be. But something that I heard from multiple people. So I thought that that was great to get that. The other thing that I heard across many conversations is that it's been an interesting year, right? 2023 kind of started out a bit gangbusters, where we're getting into the new year, everyone's excited, but there was so much talk about the economy. Obviously, interest rates have risen several times this year. That has had a big impact on what is happening in the advertising space. And I know that many people felt a lull at the end of Q1, in Q2, Q3, at least for us at True Native, has felt better than the other quarters have. And there is definitely lots of talk about how Q4 is looking to be a very strong quarter. Obviously, Q4 is traditionally a very strong quarter because of the holidays and because of holiday spending that happens. But I will say that it felt as though many agencies and brands were saying, hey, we're coming out of hiding a bit. We're going to be placing additional buys. We're ready to invest in getting the message out there. So while maybe in the past, in the last few months, it had been on hold, maybe for a good part of this year, their advertising and marketing budgets have been a little inconsistent. It feels like there is a push to really get into Q4 in a strong way. And that is always music to my ears because, of course, that's what we want. That's what we need in order to continue to grow as an industry. So really excited to see that. One of the things that is really fascinating to me about the podcast space is that there are a lot of new opportunities within the podcast space with new companies that are entering. And of course, we know that as we see growth in an industry, there's going to be other people who come along and say, hey, I want to be part of this. I want to join the conversation. I want to get a piece of the pie. So we know that it makes sense for other companies to come to the party, and we're happy to have them. But I do think it is really fascinating to me how many conversations we had with agencies that were like, hey, we haven't been doing podcast advertising, but we're getting into it now. This audio buying, this audio spending is becoming more important to us. We're investing more dollars, more resources into entering the space and trying to execute the campaigns well. And for me, that is a very exciting time because while of course we have the partners in this space that have been around, like True Native, right, for 7+ years, we are happy that we have the foundation, but we also know that we want to grow, and growing really does mean having other people enter the space. So that piece is really important, right? That we make sure that others can join the space. And I'm excited because if we see more dollars entering the industry, that is going to help everyone, as we always talk about. So excited about that. The other thing that I find really fascinating is that newer agencies coming into the space do tend to be bigger fans of dynamic ad insertion. And the reason I believe that they are fans is because just as I started the episode by talking about CTV, there's this element of safety, of targetability, of data that comes with dynamic ad insertion that doesn't always come with that embedded ad read. And we know that there is power with the embedded ad read. We know that when an ad is in an episode and it stays in an episode, that we're going to see results. And really, what we need to figure out now is how do we take these dynamically inserted ads and these programmatically inserted ads and really leverage those to create the results that we're looking for. But it's neat to me to see new agencies entering the space who really understand this concept of the power of dynamic ad insertion and what that can do for us. Again, not to say that there isn't power in embedded, but really, I believe what is happening within the course of the next year or so is a remolding of the space. So as we continue to see more programmatic ad placement, as we continue to see a lean into the dynamic ad insertion technology, we still have this power of influence that can happen with an embedded ad read. It just is going to be approached differently and perhaps more on a sponsorship level, and perhaps in a way that the advertiser and the podcaster really are getting into a longer term relationship as opposed to just buying a spot here or there. So I do think that the separation between embedded ads and programmatic is just going to continue to get larger and larger until I think, it does tend to be like it is in radio right now, right? Where there are still radio jocks that read ads and give testimonials. And then there's a lot of ads that are more, pre-recorded and they're just put in there. Now, no one wants us to get to those pre-recorded ad days of radio where there's a bazillion ads within a podcast, right? But I do think that there is so much opportunity for us to consider that programmatic piece as a stepping stone for really the scalability of the industry. So I think that that's important. So it's neat to see that we are having more companies that are entering the space. I would also say it just feels to me like there is more of everything. I love software. I love technology, but man, I feel like we are getting hit up so much more with, we created this platform, it does X, Y, and Z, you need to buy into it, it's going to help you do, these things, it's going to solve this problem for you. And I'm having to really consider what we're investing in, what it's able to do for us. It doesn't feel like there is as many kind of one-off companies like there used to be, where it was like this company was the only company that did this thing, right? Like when Podsight started, it's the only company that's doing attribution tracking. Now everybody's doing attribution tracking, right? So there are just so many more software companies that are entering this space. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see kind of where front runners emerge and where we can see maybe some cohesion, because I do still think that that is so important. It's still a point of frustration to me that there is so much siloed information that doesn't feel like it translates well from software company to software company, and that there isn't more cohesion between all of us. So as we see an increase of different companies coming into the space, I would also love to see if we can figure out how to get some cohesion, especially as it pertains to ad tech in particular. So that is my take on podcast movement. I really believe that the industry is continuing to grow. I, saw a headline, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, that said, the podcast bubble has not burst. Like, we have not hit the peak of where we're at in podcasting. And I will say this year, I think that there's been a tendency to be concerned about that, right? I know for our company, we are up in sales, healthy, like our sales are a healthy increase this year. However, we were used to healthier increases in the past, right? So We aren't seeing the types of increase this year that we had seen in past years. But I mean, come on, as a business and as an industry, we do have to be happy that we are in a place where we are seeing increases. And I think because the increases haven't been as significant this year as they were in prior years, that is making people in the industry say, oh, well, this feast that was happening in the podcast space is over. Now we're getting back into more real life and real business. And, I think the story is being told that perhaps that isn't quite the case. And I would agree with it. I still believe that there is a lot of opportunity within podcast advertising and within the podcast space just in general. Yes, it's morphing. Yes, I didn't touch on YouTube, but of course, YouTube is really playing a role. Doing more integrated campaigns is certainly, I would say, I've never had so many conversations about we're not just buying podcast advertising, but we want to buy social, we want to buy YouTube, we want to buy these different things. I would say this is something we've been talking about, but I really see more action being taken. And so I do think that that's important for us to look at. So there is a lot of shifting, a lot of changing, a lot of growth, but I do not believe that we have hit the top. I still think that there's a lot more opportunity in the podcast space. And of course, that's what we all want and like. And so it's great to be here. And it's just terrific to be part of an industry where I go to these events and I do feel like I'm running into some of my dearest friends because they're people that I have now known for years. And we are all working together with a common goal. And it's just terrific that we can be part of and that I can be part of an industry that I feel so proud of. And I feel like really anyone can get a seat at the table if they would like it. And so it's interesting to see the chairs multiplying, perhaps, right, as we have more and more people coming to the table. But I do really believe that it is a terrific industry. I'm proud to be part of it. And I hope that this has been helpful for you. So as you look to try and plan either future campaigns or to predict revenue, I do believe that there is so much more opportunity and so much more out there. So thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Please do head on over to my YouTube channel. I have been working to create more YouTube videos, and I hope that you can find resources there. So just head on over to Heather Osgood on YouTube and check those out. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.